This is going to be a very in-depth look at the Sony A95K, and we're going to go over the best setup and settings for all kinds of content. But before we get to that part, we're going to take some time and look at some charts and some measurements so you can understand why the recommendations that are going to be made are made. So if you find this video useful, if you could leave a comment below and a like, I'd appreciate it. Alright, so we're going to start with SDR. And what we're going to do is start with the custom picture mode. There is this misconception I've been hearing from others trying to say cinema is the most accurate mode out of the box. It's not, it's custom. So as we look at dynamic range, we can see we don't get any clipping until 108. That's fine. Now if we measure the grayscale against D65 as a target, you see there's too much blue. That's because Sony uses JUD. So when we measure for JUD as the target, you see how close it actually is. You can also see how the gamma is a little too bright near black. Now when we go into the color checker, and we're going to keep JUD as our target just to be fair, you can see 0.8 average, very, very good. And we go into saturation sweeps, aside from a little bit of oversaturation at the top end of red, which is typical for Sony's, there's nothing really to complain about. Alright, so now we're going to check cinema mode, and again, still using JUD as the target, even though I disagree with JUD being what they targeted on this TV. You can see it's much worse. The color checker is now 2.44 average with a much higher max. And so the main three things you need to know about cinema mode is it comes with live color on and contrast enhancer on out of the box, as well as it tracks gamma differently. So we'll come back to cinema mode later. So with game mode, I'm going to measure 2.2 gamma because that's what it targets out of the box. And you can see game mode is excellent. It is actually the most accurate mode out of the box on the A95K. The thing with game mode is it disables your motion and your other processing features. However, that little bit of red oversaturation at the top end isn't nearly as much in game mode. So you get even lower color errors, and you can see here 111% of 709, that's in any of the movie modes. And then when we measure in game mode for Rec 709 coverage, it drops to 104, again because that red isn't being so oversaturated. My biggest complaint in all these modes is they're all 300 nits in SDR out of the box. Alright, let's look at HDR. HDR, custom picture mode, using JUD as our target. You see pretty much perfectly flat EOTF, very, very good. Here's the brightness measurements with 210 nits full field. Keep that in mind. We're going to talk about that later. Now we go into the color checker, and this is why the A95K has the premium it does. This is the most color accurate HDR TV to date, at least that I have seen or measured. And this is mostly due to the ability of hitting the luminance targets as well. Alright, now we're going to look at the tone mapping being set to brightness preferred. You see it no longer tracks and it's too bright. And then when we turn the tone mapping to off, it brightens even more. And then when we turn peak luminance down to medium while tone mapping is off, you see it tracks again, but the problem here is now our luminance is only 550 nits. Alright, so now to check cinema in HDR mode. And again, out of the box, it has contrast enhancer, so you see a bump in the EOTF, has live color on. And then here's the interesting thing though. When we look here at cinema mode, we see a higher full field reading. So while cinema mode out of the box is not accurate, as you can see here with the colors, what we can do is make a couple of fine adjustments to cinema mode and then have that higher full field 75 and 50% measurements, meaning a more relaxed ABL. So just by disabling the contrast enhancer and the live color, we can now use cinema mode to have a brighter APL capability of the A95K than if we were using the custom picture mode. And the color errors in cinema mode with these adjustments are very similar to in custom. But now we need to go back to SDR for a moment and check how cinema looks. So if we were to put the gamma at -2 like you would for custom mode, you can see there's a huge difference in the gamma. But if you leave it at 0, it's actually pretty good and probably better for most rooms because 2.4 is best for a completely dark room, but not many people have that. So you'll actually have a little bit more visibility in dark shadowy areas in cinema mode. And then colors, again, fantastic. So we'll come back to this. Now we're going to check game mode in HDR. EOTF, again, excellent. And pretty similar to how we saw in SDR, game mode continues to be very, very good. It also doesn't have as aggressive of ABL as the custom picture mode, getting 235 full field. And then when we look at the color checker, again, fantastic. Just really the best HDR results we've seen. And for those wondering, this is vivid mode. It is not that much brighter. It's not worth looking at. Now, if we look at the full gamut coverage in BT 2020, we see 90%. That is fully usable. There's no gamut issues or bugs to worry about. And that also applies to game mode. There's no change. So now let's look at Dolby Vision. So this is Dolby Vision Bright. This is why Dolby Vision Bright is the inaccurate mode to use. And then if you are going to use Dolby Vision Bright, if you do enable gradation preferred on the tone mapping, you do see that it helps it a little bit. So some people like to use that in their day modes. Okay. Now Dolby Vision Dark, measuring for JUD, you see how there's not enough blue. And that's because there's an offset with Dolby Vision Dark on the Sony TVs. Now we measure D65 and it's pretty much spot on. That's what the offset is for. But now if we were to adjust the rest of the TV using 2-point adjustment, now we're back to the not enough blue problem. And then if you were to use the warm color temperature, then there is too much blue. So we will talk about some ways to get around the Dolby Vision issues. Alright, so first, if you wanted to get the extra picture modes and you were going to get the 20-point unlocked for calibration, you need to get the Calman for Bravia app, and then you go to the screen and there's an IP address, and if you just go on your phone or your computer that's connected to the same internet and you type in the IP address and the port number, it'll trick it and unlock everything for you. That would give you 2 additional custom picture mode presets called Custom for Pro 1 and Custom for Pro 2 that are identical to Custom, but for the purposes of this video, you don't have to do that. It's just an extra thing you can do if you want those modes, or if you are going to have the TV calibrated, then you would need to do that. So as we come down, you can see it now has a 20-point instead of where previously it said 10-point. And you see Custom for Pro 2, and then if I scroll over to Pro 1, it's the same, and then going to Custom, it's also the same as long as the settings are the same. Here there's just a little bit of brightness changes that were done. So let's start with Custom, because if you buy the A95K or any Sony for that matter, and you just want something simple, all you have to do, put it in Custom Picture Mode, and that's it. That's very accurate, just like that. Now you saw I changed the peak luminance down to low, so if you do that and you have the brightness anywhere from 35 to max, that's what I would recommend for SDR in most cases. And then gamma of -1 should be around 2.3 gamma, and again, for most people, that's what I would recommend for most homes. Everything else in the custom picture modes you can leave alone, except for the processing features. Those are up to you. For reality creation, as you see, as you turn it up really high, it just adds a lot of noise and artifacts and problems with the image. I would say anything over 35 is too much. You can leave it at manual up to about 20, or generally what I recommend is put on auto. If you have a clean 4K source, then it shouldn't be doing anything, and auto does a good job of detecting that, and then it will only apply it when it's a lower quality or a low resolution source. Same thing with the noise reduction settings. I find putting them to auto does a good job of not using it when it doesn't need to, and then only applying it slightly when it does. Smooth gradation at low is fine. For motion, the smoothness is your motion interpolation. I suggest min or 1. Some people like 2. Clearness is either low or high, but think of it as on and off, with low being off, and that's where you want it, or it will flicker and cut the brightness. Cinemotion, I suggest low for the most compatibility with most content. But now what we're going to do is switch over to Custom for Pro 1, and this time we're going to leave brightness at max. We're going to put gamma to 0, peak luminance we're going to put to medium or leave at medium, and then put everything else the same. And essentially what this is going to do is we're going to have custom for our dark viewing, custom for Pro 1 as our generally brighter daytime use viewing mode, and then custom for Pro 2 you can set up for max brightness with the peak luminance on high. And if you were to only use this mode, say for sports, and you wanted a different motion setting, then you can set that on this mode, and then it would be separate from Pro 1 and regular custom. So this is an advantage of having these extra modes if you downloaded them like I suggested earlier. You could also set them up with equal settings and then make each one different motion settings and toggle back and forth until you find what you like, making it just a little bit easier to experiment. Before we move on, just to comment, all three of these custom modes, gamma is the same. So at 0, it would be 2.2. At -1, it's 2.3. -2, it's 2.4. Now we're going to switch over to game mode. So game mode, again, don't really need to do much. This is another good thing with the Sony. It's pretty much just set it to the mode and it's good to go. So the only thing I would change is reality creation to auto. I'm going to leave smooth gradation on low. And just remember that all of your SDR processing settings are going to carry over to HDR as well. So now, as I said earlier, cinema mode is a little bit better for HDR because of the more relaxed ABL. But we need to change a couple things first, again, because the picture settings mostly apply for SDR and HDR. So you see advanced contrast enhancer was on medium, we don't want that. Peak luminance, we can turn that down to low. Gamma at 0, as I showed earlier, is different than the custom modes. And then live color was on low, we want to turn that off. And now we can do the rest of the processing how we did for the other modes. So if you're someone who does not want to be changing the picture modes all the time, day and night, switching back and forth for SDR and HDR, then this is going to be your best bet, as it will give you the better HDR performance, and you'll have SDR right around 180 nits. Again, you can turn that brightness down. I suggest setting SDR yourself. Just leave the peak luminance on low if you can. The higher you set it, the more ABL you will get. Okay, so now we need to go into the basic settings and go to our external inputs and go to our HDMI signal formats, and we need to make sure all of these are set how you want them. So if you are using, say, a cable box, I recommend that on standard format. Then just about anything else should be enhanced. Your port 3 is your eARC port and one of your 2.1 ports. So if you're going to be using Dolby Vision, it should be on enhanced with Dolby Vision. If you're going to be gaming, I don't suggest using this port for that. I suggest dedicating 4 to your gaming, but I will set 3 to VRR just to demonstrate. So I do have a receiver that is 4K 120 with VRR, Dolby Vision, everything, so I can show how this is going to work. Right now the Xbox and PlayStation are connected to that receiver. So starting with the Xbox, you can see we get 4K 120 VRR. This is how everything should be set up with no Dolby Vision. So now on the HDR setup, pull both triggers, both bumpers. You just want to move that first black screen all the way left so that it says 0. And then previously with Sony's, what we would do is go down to the brightness section and go to the tone mapping and turn gradation preferred to off, and then set the Xbox up or the PlayStation, and then go back in and turn gradation preferred on. However, that doesn't work with this TV, as the pattern will clip at 500 nits. So all you have to do, just don't worry about it, leave your gradation preferred on, and then set both of these luminance screens to 1000 nits, and any games with sliders that let you put in an exact nit value, set to 1000 nits. And you can see I'm going through the rest of the settings just to show that the reality creation is still on auto, smooth gradation is still on low, how we had it set in SDR, because that stuff will be the same from SDR to HDR. So with the TV on gradation preferred, it is going to tone map up to around 2300 or so nits, so no matter what, you're going to see those checkers. And on the PlayStation, what you're going to do is go all the way down to darker, and then you're going to click up 15 times. So 15 clicks from being all the way at the bottom, and then you're done. Again, you're going to see the sun here no matter what. It's not going to clip because of the tone mapping being on. And then when you get to the black level screen, again, you're just going to go all the way down until you can't go anymore so that you get real black. So then we're going to go into the PlayStation screen and video settings, make sure everything is set up right here. Pretty much mostly everything can be on automatic. And what I want to show is VRR is on automatic. And again, we're using port 3 right now with port 3 set to VRR. Going to make sure HDR is set to on when supported. And then enable 120 Hz is still on automatic as well. But remember that me being on port 3 with it set to VRR is for demonstration purposes right now, and instead I would recommend you connect your console to port 4. And then when you are using it in VRR mode, there is a bit of an increase in input lag. So it's up to you if you want to use the VRR or leave it in just regular enhanced and have lower input lag without VRR. So you see there's 120 Hz support while we are in VRR. Now I'm going to switch it to Dolby Vision in case you were going through a receiver with other devices and you want Dolby Vision on the other devices. Now every time you do that, it is going to trigger a new EDID response, so you're going to have to set up the HDR again. But now you see when it's in Dolby Vision, you top out at 60 Hz. There's no more 120. You cannot have the TV set to enhanced Dolby Vision and get 120 Hz. It's only the enhanced mode or enhanced VRR that is going to do that. Also, VRR mode on the TV is going to lock it into game mode with no way to change it. So that is why I recommend you connect your console to HDMI 4 or your PC and not go through the receiver. However, if you have more than one system and that's just not going to work for you, if you just set it to regular enhanced, you can still get 120 Hz and it's not going to lock it into game mode. And doing it this way will also help with the Dolby Vision issue that I brought up earlier, and we'll get to that soon. So you can see now with it on enhanced, we get 120 Hz again, and also lower input lag from it not being in the VRR mode. Now again, if you just have one console, best solution, plug it into port 4, and then you decide if you want to use regular enhanced or the VRR mode. Alright, so going back into this menu, again, for the most part, I would say HDMI 4, dedicated console, maybe put on VRR, HDMI 3, either use enhanced if you're not worried about Dolby Vision, or set it to enhanced Dolby Vision if you do want Dolby Vision. However, you can also use Dolby Vision on HDMI 1 and 2 if you have a dedicated device that you want to use for Dolby Vision, which is one of the solutions to the Dolby Vision issue. So now on a Apple TV, this is the way you want to have it set up. So the Apple TV set to 4K SDR with the HDMI output set to RGB high, and then your match dynamic range and frame rate turned on. Now that will let it switch between SDR, HDR, and Dolby Vision depending on the content. So my Apple TV is going through my receiver and I have it set to enhanced, but if I switch it to Dolby Vision, then I can get Dolby Vision from the Apple TV just fine. But if I only wanted it to be SDR or HDR, I could leave it enhanced and not have Dolby Vision. I can also disable or enable Dolby Vision through my receiver. Alright, but right now we're going to look at Dolby Vision settings, and it defaulted to vivid. We definitely don't want that. And I showed you earlier, bright is going to be more inaccurate and dark is the accurate mode, and it's actually very accurate on this TV. So if we want to use dark though, it is going to change the white point or color temperature, even though it says that it's the same color temperature, and that's because Dolby Dark does have a offset that Sony applies automatically when using one of the expert color temperatures. So if I were to calibrate this, normally how I would calibrate, then I can use Expert 2 and do the calibration with the 20 point. But for most of you listening to this, you're looking for normal settings that anyone can do, and you want to know how you can get Dolby Vision to not have this different color temperature or white point look to all of your other content. So now you can see where I have under the basic 2-point adjustment, -5 on green, -7 on blue. So that's to get all the other content, so SDR, HDR, and Dolby Vision bright, to where I want it. But if I set it to default, then the Dolby Vision dark is at D65, but then everything else is JUD. So some of your options would be 1, just don't use Dolby Vision. 2, use Dolby Vision bright and turn on gradation preferred. This is going to over brighten the Dolby Vision, and again, if you're using it during the daytime, then maybe that's not so bad, but still not really recommended. There's no offset to worry about with the Dolby Vision bright mode, and you can see as I'm going through, I'm just making adjustments to the processing settings how I would normally have them. And you can see here under the advanced color temperature basic, they're all default values, and that's because I reset them when I was just on Dolby Dark. That setting applies to everything on that input. So that's why if you were to use those settings on HDR or SDR and then you set them back to default for Dolby Dark, then you would have to be constantly changing it back and forth if you were to do it that way. Now the other option, which you may have just put two and two together, you can do Dolby Vision on its own dedicated input and have different or default 2-point settings for Dolby Dark, and then just switch inputs whenever you want to watch Dolby content. But if you're going to use Dolby Bright, I can use the same 2-point settings for Dolby Bright that I use for SDR and HDR10. But I think the easiest way around all of this is just to disable the Dolby Vision on your main input that you're using, which is probably 3, and just use the built-in apps for Dolby Vision content, and then maybe have a dedicated UHD player connected to either port 1 or 2, and then you can toggle Dolby Vision on or off on that specific device. Or I also recommend the Amazon Fire Cube or Fire Stick, so that could be your other HDMI port 1 or 2. So you can have a UHD player to 1 and a Fire Stick to 2, and then everything else to 3, and your game console to 4. And then you can easily get around the Dolby Vision issue that way. You're just going to have to switch inputs when you want to watch Dolby Vision content. And you can see now that I've put it to enhanced and I switch back to the Apple TV, going through the receiver on port 3, it's HDR10. And if you want to know what is better between HDR10 and Dolby Vision on the A95K, keep an eye on the channel, as I will be doing an updated Dolby Vision video with the A95K and the G2 in the near future. But if you were to disable the Dolby Vision and you're going to use HDR10, you see that we're in cinema mode, and it doesn't matter if your color temperature is on expert 1 or 2, they're the same, and all of our settings are just like they were when we set them in the SDR cinema mode. And you can see my basic 2-point adjustment here is in place, so the color temperature and or white point is where I want it. Everything else left alone. Again, the advanced settings you really should not be copying or touching without proper equipment to measure and make sure that it's correct. However, if you want to try the -5 green, -7 blue, go ahead, because so far every A95K I have seen has been Judd white point from the factory. Doesn't so far look like that there's any other factory white point, so you can try it, see if you like it, but if not, just leave it at the default, or maybe just reduce blue by 5 or 6 clicks. Alright, so now I'm showing that if you do go to the home menu and you go look up in the top, it says picture and apps. So you will have to set up, this counts as another source or another input, so you'll have to set up all your settings for that, and then you need to open a video app. There's technically 2 different sources of apps on the Sony TVs. So if you load into the Netflix app, it now says apps and then video in parentheses. So this is your second app source, so you're gonna have to do all the settings again. So same settings as before, you just have to do it for those, and then for each input you will have to manually go through and do all the settings as well, because there's no way to copy to all inputs on Sony TVs. And so lastly, I will say that the built-in apps and the Google OS system works pretty well on this TV, so if you didn't want to buy a secondary streaming device for your Dolby Vision specific content, there is no way to disable Dolby Vision from the built-in apps, so that is a fine solution for watching your Dolby Vision content through the built-in apps, and then everything else through the HDMI ports if you want to do it that way. But that's it. That's all the main tips and tricks to set up your Sony A95K to the best that you can for accuracy with all content and sources. If you use it as a monitor with a PC, use the graphics mode, and it's the same settings as game mode because game and graphics are basically the same. And then you can just switch to the game mode for when you're playing games on the PC. And then for sports, just use one of those brighter custom for pro modes that we talked about at the beginning, and that's it. So I hope this helps you out, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks for watching.